Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Your Health Made Simple Autoimmune Sucks webinar because it really, really does. A woman looks at her watch for a third time. It's been 30 minutes since they put her into this room. She is very familiar with this room and she's hoping for some good news this time, but she's nervous. What if there isn't any good news? The door opens, and a man in a perfectly pressed lab coat walks in and sits down. He listens for a few minutes, pulls out his pen and paper, and begins to write another prescription in the long line of prescriptions that they've already tried. The frustration level grows. How many of you can relate to this scenario? I know I could. My name is Tracy Gowler, and life is good. My life was very much like my cousin Vinny. My grandfather was a mechanic. My other grandfather was a mechanic. My uncle was a mechanic. My cousin's a mechanic, etc., etc. And at 17, I pulled my first engine with my dad. And this was the beginning of my 20-year career as a mechanical engineer. When I started as a mechanical engineer, I was the only girl in the group. I was given the task of managing the schedule and the budget, along with all the design work I was doing. And so I've also had 30 years of managing projects and process. Sorry. And what I think is cool is I was able to take the skills I learned in my career and marry it with my 40-year interest in health and wellness. And I love that. But life hasn't always been that awesome. When I was 16, I had a lot of allergies and gut infections that I just couldn't get it cleared up. And so I spent 6 months on antibiotics, and who knew at that time what that was going to cause. At 35, I had heart issues and brain fog and severe cramping and swollen joints, just weird swollen joints, like to the point where my thumb would be 3 times the size, and they didn't know what to do. I also began to develop allergy-induced asthma. I could barely walk up the stairs of my home at 45. The reality is I was the poster child for unhealthy living. Even though I had such a huge interest in my health, I was the poster child for unhealthy living. In July of 2012, I went home to see my grandmother for the last time, and I ended up in the hospital myself. What a loser. And I knew they were going to want to take my gallbladder. So before I let my family take me to the hospital, I did 12 hours of research. And at 10:03 p.m. that night, when the doctor walked in to tell me he thought that was the best option, in that moment, I decided no more. That was my no more. I refused to let them take my gallbladder. I took the antibiotics and the painkillers, and I got myself home. Now, it was a long journey to health, but I did it. And in the process, I got my certification in functional diagnostic nutrition. And it's allowed me to take my troubleshooting skills from engineering. It's allowed me to take my structured problem solving from engineering and project management and take my functional diagnostic nutrition certification and sort of become a Sherlock Holmes of chronic illness and autoimmune disease. And I love what I do. I am so passionate about what I do because I have applied this to myself and it worked. For the record, I'm 55. I climbed 90-foot ice walls. That's not me on that ice wall. That's that's me taking the picture of this person climbing it right before I did. And I also kayak rivers. And I also play infield on a co-ed softball team. And I don't know how many more years I'm going to be able to do that, but I'm loving every year that I still can. At 45, I couldn't have done this. So I'm pretty thrilled about the fact that at 55, I can. Okay, so now that's my background. How many of you would like to know a thing or two that I have learned and how it can help you? So before I get started, my business supports women over 40 with Hashimoto's autoimmune disease. Now, it's the most prevalent of all the autoimmune diseases. There are approximately 30 million of us. That's an estimation. It could be more. There's about 17 million-ish that have been diagnosed. But the reality is anyone with hypothyroidism that's been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, 95% of those actually have Hashimoto's. So the numbers could be quite a bit higher. And then there's a lot that don't have a diagnosis that we know are out there because they're struggling with those symptoms. So the number, it's hard to assess, but we assess around 30 million. 80% of that massive number are women. What the hell, right? And I've had a lot of children and young adults as referrals, so I have just officially added an additional aspect to my practice to work with families and their children. And the reality is that I'm so passionate about what I do that I also take clients in that are struggling with other autoimmune diseases if they fit. Let's talk about what autoimmune is. You might know, you might not know, but this is the place for this webinar to start. It's an illness that occurs when the body tissues are attacked by its own immune system. So you can see here a lot of the different types of autoimmune diseases, and there's over 100 of them. And there's a lot of different ones that can attack the different systems in the body. Literally, for every tissue or organ we have, we could develop an autoimmune disease for that. The attack is triggered by the immune system. And that's crazy. That means our immune system is turning on us. So Hashimoto's is an attack on the thyroid tissue. Ulcerative colitis is attacking the colon tissue. RA, or rheumatoid arthritis, is attacking your joints, etc., etc. There's 100 autoimmune diseases identified now, and unfortunately, it is affecting our children now. I heard there have been some babies born with ulcerative colitis, and that is so sad. Like I just said, some are born with these illnesses, and it really is an epidemic. And unfortunately, the current medical model is not equipped to deal with it. All autoimmune diseases start with the same mechanism, which is crazy. All disease starts with the same mechanism. So in order to have autoimmune or a chronic illness, and cancer is now considered an autoimmune disease and Alzheimer's is now considered an autoimmune disease, you have to have the following things. You have to have a genetic propensity. You have to have leaky gut, which we're going to cover here in a minute. And you have to have triggers, which we're going to cover next. So what are the triggers? Gluten. Gluten's a big, big, big offender. It's also a big discussion, and I'm not going to get into it in this presentation, so you're just going to have to trust me on this. But do you know what gluten is? Well, gluten comes from wheat, and some just don't have immediate effects like an allergy, or even a latent effect like sensitivities to gluten, but it does affect the body in a negative way. And I tell all of my clients to eliminate gluten. It's just not serving any of us, unfortunately. Chronic infection, and what I mean is another trigger. What I mean by chronic infection are gut infections. We have over 1 trillion bacteria in the body. 90% of it is in our gut. And when I refer to the gut, I mean from the point of entry to the point of exit for food that we eat. And the strength of our immune system is defined by the health of our gut. So now if that bacteria gets out of balance, that trillion bacteria, parasites grow, and the bad bacteria takes over, and opportunistic fungus grow inside our body. That's kind of gross to think about, but it makes the operation of the gut very difficult because now that very specific balance of bacteria is no longer in balance, and it's now adding to the vicious circle of dysfunction that develops. And that's how illnesses get started. So stress, both internal and external stressors you do have control over. Those are things like traffic and arguments, politics in this day and age that just fire people up, bad bosses, bad relationships, and stress plays a very significant role I was just at a microbiome conference this last weekend, and they were talking about the way that it does affect the gut. And I just happened to read a research paper on it. It's amazing what it does. Internal stressors, those are a little more difficult to define. And you have chronic infections, which we just talked about, the imbalance of bacteria and those things that form in the gut. Poor food choices can create internal stressors. External stresses can create internal stresses. Environmental and chemical toxins, which we are exposed to crazy. I was just watching another documentary that was saying called Stink. It's a great documentary. That now babies, which should be born so pure and beautiful, are being born with over 200 different chemical toxins in their bodies. And that is just a tragedy. All of these things can be a trigger to internal stresses. Poor diet. So if you're eating processed foods like sugar, dairy, and gluten, you're eating a poor diet. Food sensitivities. Now, those are different from allergies. Allergic reactions to foods create an immediate response, and food sensitivities, although they're not as severe, they are usually delayed as well, making it very difficult to define because the effects of your food sensitivities could be several days later, and you may not even have a reaction to the food sensitivities, which makes the elimination diet not as useful anymore. So the response from food sensitivities could be joint pains, digestive issues, skin issues, headaches, and migraines. Migraines are generally due to food sensitivities and poor eating habits, but like I said, you don't always have to have a sensitivity, like a response to it. So you may have food sensitivities that you don't know or understand. Toxins. Now we talked about what causes internal stressors, but they are toxins, chemical and environmental, but they can also be a trigger on their own. So these kind of intertwine with each other and they kind of create each other to some degree, like poor diet creates food sensitivities. Food sensitivities can create internal stress, that kind of thing. Antibiotics. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that there aren't times that you need to take antibiotics. There are. The reality is that when you do take them, you need to be working on counteracting them and have already been counteracting them in your body. So essentially, the counteract becomes a maintenance program forever. But the antibiotics do have a reason. They have changed the way we live with health from both a positive and a negative perspective. They have changed our ability to survive infections and illnesses that used to kill people in the early 19th century, but they can have a negative impact as well. So the goal of antibiotics is to kill infections, parasites, bacteria, and fungus. And when they do their job, the problem is that they also kill the good with the bad. And then the balance of bacteria that I talked about in our gut can get out of whack. And it can take a year for the health of your gut to recover if you aren't doing things to counteract those antibiotics. Now, again, I want to say I'm not telling you don't take them because sometimes it's necessary. It's just good to understand what can happen and to really only take when necessary because they can be life-saving. So if you do have to take them, you also want to make sure that you're supporting your system with healthy probiotics. Not all probiotics out there are going to do the job for you. So based on the influence that they can have on your gut, they can also be a trigger. Hormones can be a trigger. Now they're at the center of the operation in your body. And when your body starts to struggle, your hormone production is affected. They can become a secondary priority if your body is under stress. So if we're running like our body is moving at a pace that creates stress, or we've got all these triggers creating stress, the body was designed to operate differently in a fight or flight response. And, however, thousands of years ago when humans started, that response was real because they were running from, like saber-toothed tigers, or they were fighting with, the next little band of humans, and life was pretty simple back then. So when they were running from that saber-toothed tiger, when that stopped, when they got away, the fight or flight response stopped and they went back to normal. However, in this day and age, with the way that we live and the way that we are exposing our bodies to all those triggers I just talked about, our systems stay in that fight or flight response, making it really hard for what the body considers to be secondary priorities like hormones. Um, and so they just aren't made right anymore because they're putting, the body puts everything to the fight or flight response and all of the systems that need to support that response in the body. Hormones aren't one of them. So when the hormones get out of whack, guess what? Your body's not working quite right and they become a trigger, an internal stressor. So that's kind of interesting, right? All these different things that can cause triggers in your body. But guess what? All of these triggers can also cause internal stress. So let's talk about leaky gut. I have an entire webinar on leaky gut, but I'm trying to keep this one short. So leaky gut, the correct name is called intestinal permeability. It's referring to the small intestine, which is about 20 feet long, and it has two primary functions. Let's move to a diagram. So this is the lining of the small intestine. You know, it's kind of rudimentary, but I think you get it. And this is like way magnified. And it's, so the small lining of the small intestine is made up of little itty bitty fingers that are lined with cells, which are those little square blocks that have even smaller fingers on those epithelial cells, which are those little small blocks. And then those little fingers are covered in hairs. So we haven't shown everything, but you kind of get it. All right. All of this work is to absorb nutrients. It's to increase basically the surface area so that our body can absorb nutrients from the foods that we eat through a very significant digestive process. So those little hairs are moving back and forth all the time, catching those nutrients after we've chewed up our food and the small intestines had a little bit of time to help break it down with those digestive juices. And then those little hairs kind of suck the nutrients in through the epithelial cells. So let's move to the next diagram. So now as the gut deteriorates through infection, through those triggers and stress, so through antibiotics and stress and poor food choices and food sensitivities, etc., those fingers and those little hairs start to get damaged. So you can see off to the left, I don't know if you can see my pointer here, but you've got these food particles kind of coming in through the hairs. And that's kind of cool because that's the way it's supposed to work. So over here on the left is sort of a healthy version of the gut. Now, as the gut deteriorates, through those things we just talked about, the body can no longer efficiently absorb food, resulting, because we move way over here to the right, and you've got these hairs are deteriorating, and there's no hairs left, and we don't have the ability now to pull the nutrients in. So when the body can no longer efficiently absorb food, it results in malabsorption and malnutrition. So any of you with autoimmune have ever started to feel fatigued or tired and a little foggy? There's a couple of things that can cause fog, but if you're not absorbing nutrients, which is one of the first things we're going to go after, then this is what happens to the body. You end up with malnutrition, malabsorption, and exhaustion. And the lining of the small intestine is also getting damaged at this point. Now, that's what I mean are these little cells over here. And they have responsibility for protecting the inside of the body, kind of like this is the second, sorry, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but this is the second thing that the small intestine does. So they want to be protecting the lining like linebackers on a football team. Or if you've ever played Red Rover as a kid and you guys are hanging on tight when somebody's coming running at you, that's kind of what the cells are doing. So not just absorbing food, but protecting the body. So as the body starts to break down because of triggers and internal stressors, these little tight junctions over here on the left, they're calling it a tight junction, can no longer hold tight together because they're not actually attached. They're just kind of holding together like Red Rover. And all the things that they're meant to protect us against start to make it into the inside of the body and the bloodstream. So you can see if you move a little bit further to the right, this junction has now been disrupted and things are making it in a way that it wasn't intended. And if we go even further to the right, we've got bigger things coming through. And what is this? It could be a toxin. It could be big chunks of food that haven't been digested yet. And now, because it's making it through into our bloodstream, guess what? The T cells are getting activated, these helper T cells. They're like killer cells. And our immune system is activated to attack these foreign invaders. And it's happening all the time. And the immune system is on overdrive and can't shut off because all of the toxins and the food particles, it could be food making it in here, in a way that it wasn't intended. So the body develops now a food sensitivity to that food because it came in the wrong way, even though the food is good for us. That's how we develop food sensitivities. So the immune system cannot recognize any longer that it's supposed to be good for us because it's not there in a way that it was supposed to be there. And the more our gut breaks down, the more inflammation in the gut, the more food sensitivities develop. And when I say the more inflammation in the gut, this means the more the lining of the gut breaks down. So it's a very vicious cycle. And guess what happens? It contributes to disease in the body. So now let's talk a little bit about gluten. Gluten also plays a huge role in leaky gut. Gluten releases a chemical called zonulin. The body actually uses zonulin itself to open those tight junctions. Isn't it amazing what the body can do? Or the cells in the lining of the gut when it needs to eliminate toxins, but the body has control of that. Now, if you're eating gluten and zonulin is being released on a daily basis, those tight junctions are being opened all the time, not by the body, by gluten. So it's letting toxins in and food into your system, activating the immune system. So now, do you kind of understand how bad gluten can be for you? Yeah, it affects everyone, no matter if you have an allergy or not. Some people just aren't affected or they aren't recognizing the effects, and maybe that's just because the tolerance of their body is higher than yours, and they just haven't hit that place yet of developing an attack that is recognized in the form of symptoms. But it does affect everyone, no matter if you have an allergy or not. And just a small amount of gluten can stay in your system for up to 6 months, wreaking havoc. Crazy, right? Crazy. Okay. There are 5 stages or progressions of the autoimmune disease. In the first stage, you basically have no symptoms. Your organs and your tissues, they're still functioning at an optimal level, but you have a genetic predisposition. It exists. And meaning that if you have the triggers, the likelihood of developing autoimmune is going to be very, very high. So, does it make sense to you that stage 5 is going on behind the scenes with you knowing nothing about it, right? There is a predisposition. Now, it's suggesting here that if you don't have those triggers, you're probably not going to kick off those genetics because they don't actually have to be kicked off. But if you're here because you have autoimmune, you've had stage 1. Second stage. In this stage, the symptoms of the disease are beginning to appear. So when I went through my list of symptoms, starting from the time I was 16, guess what? Those symptoms started pretty darn early for me. And when I look back, if I had known what I know now, I would have known then those symptoms were something to start paying attention to. And I would have known way back when that it was time to change my diet because I was just starting the early stages of autoimmune disease. And as I work with my clients and they start to look backward, they're like, they start to get those little whispers of the body, which is what I call those early symptoms before the body starts screaming. And when you have autoimmune, that's where you are. Your body's screaming. So in the second stage, antibodies may register positive on a test, but the organ or tissue results, meaning when you go out and have your thyroid tested, you may have antibodies showing up, but your tissue results will still appear normal. But in this stage, the doctor probably won't treat you with any thyroid medication because your thyroid's still operating properly. But they may treat you for depression or anxiety in that stage because that can be some of the first symptoms of the disease. It is in its early stages. And why does depression and anxiety show up at that time? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, gluten for people that have Hashimoto's is also attacking your brain surface tissue because it's very similar to the gluten protein, as well as the thyroid cell, very similar to the gluten protein. So gluten plays a little bit of a different role for people that have Hashis just because of that. That's where your brain fog is going to come from. And it could also cause potentially some, I think, depression or anxiety. But as the gut breaks down, the majority of serotonin is made in your gut, like 90%. And who knew, right? We all thought that was coming from the brain, but it's not. So as the gut breaks down, then the serotonin isn't being made the way that it should be being made. And now we're not getting the dopamines and all those things that also help make us feel better. And our sleep kind of breaks down because guess what? Melatonin is actually made from serotonin. So we aren't sleeping properly either. But there's other things that can affect sleep, not just that. So that's stage 2. That's a big stage. In stage 3, the organ begins to fail. The results of testing might now show deviation and probably would from normal readings. So now the doctor's going to start seeing your TSH moving, your T3, and your T4 is going to start moving. And in this stage, your organ or the tissue, and then for us particularly our thyroid, can no longer keep up with the autoimmune attack on the body. So that's why the organ, it's given a great fight all the way through stage 2, but by the time you get to the 3rd stage, and we're going to see some pretty significant symptoms now because our hormones are being affected, our cortisol is probably going crazy, and it has been, and now it's starting to fail on us. Our adrenals are being attacked. There's just a lot of things that are going to go wrong. And so the doctor, still maybe not going to prescribe medication because we haven't moved enough. And the reality is, from a functional medicine perspective, what I do, we look at thyroid ranges a little differently than doctors do because the majority of people that each lab has created their range from, and every lab uses a different range for the thyroid. It's based on sick people. It's not based on healthy people. The only people getting their thyroid tested are sick people. So when we look at thyroid tests, we're looking at it from a different range perspective. So we might have suggested earlier that you might need some thyroid medication than the doctors would. In the 4th stage, the tissue is failing dramatically. Symptoms are severe. Lab tests are out of range. Doctors will generally prescribe medication in this stage. Can you believe we've gone through 4 stages before the thyroid gets any damn help? Isn't that ridiculous? Now, the 5th stage is something that I really like to highlight to people, and I want them to be aware of, because in this stage, if you've done nothing to support your autoimmune disease, the disease progresses to include additional autoimmune diseases. Once your immune system has begun to attack one organ or tissue, it's only a matter of time before it starts to attack another. It's going to go after your weak link. And this is why you may meet people that have 2 or 3 autoimmune diseases. And the reality is, once you've got 2 or 3, you can still recover. You just may not get back to that 100% place that you were at, but you can recover It just takes a lot longer, and you're going to have a lot more triggers that have developed to tackle. So the longer you wait, the harder it is. And this also suggests that if you don't commit to going in there to really tackling that autoimmune disease, you will develop others. So ideally, you would want to determine the root cause of your autoimmune prior to stage 5. What I mean by the root cause is we may never know exactly where it started. We dive into all that in the education in my program. But what you do want to do is figure out what triggers you've got. And you want to heal that leaky gut, and you want to eliminate those triggers so that the attack stops. So, autoimmune disease, let's dive into there. Can autoimmune disease be cured? Well, unfortunately, no. Once you've turned on your immune system, because it's a pretty damn amazing thing, it doesn't forget. And that's good, I feel. It's good. Like, it makes it difficult for us to actually cure, but there is an opportunity to put it in remission. And by putting it into remission, it means you stop the attacks. But it means, because it remembers, that you can't go back to that lifestyle that you were living before, because if you do, you're going to trigger the attack again. So it may not be a cure. And I kind of look at this remissive opportunity as a little gift. I know it's hard when you're in it, but the reality is that little gift is going to keep you from putting yourself back in that place again, meaning that you have just taken charge of your life. You have earned and taken ownership to be healthy, and you can stay there by paying attention. And it is a lifetime of paying attention, but you can keep yourself there, and man, what a life you can live. And that's the way I look at it. Who at 55 do you know that can climb 90-foot ice walls and they're kayaking rivers? And yeah, there's a few, but not a lot can say that they can physically do that. So that's the cool thing. That's why I feel it's a gift. Let's talk about what it takes for you to heal. Diet, so very, very important. Diet can make huge, huge, huge improvements. Food sensitivities, we want to eliminate those because they do create inflammation in the gut. And the reality is, sorry, I keep saying the reality is because there's a lot of realities, sorry. But the goal is to reduce inflammation. So we need to get rid of everything that's creating inflammation. That's why we clean up diet, and why diet can make huge improvements. The food sensitivities, those need to be eliminated to allow the body to heal. Testing is best. Like I said, the elimination diet, because people don't always react to their food sensitivities, doesn't really get you down to the nitty-gritty of all of that. Gut support is also needed. The body needs to help to heal the lining of the gut. There are some really good supplements out there to help speed that up. And if that isn't enough, we want to determine the triggers through testing. We have to eliminate those triggers, and additional supplement support may be required. It isn't an easy process, but it's relatively simple. Diet can be hard, and it may be the hardest thing you have to do, and we talk about that. So let me give you an example of one of my clients. I have some amazing, amazing clients. They are like rays of sunshine for me. This client in particular I'm going to talk about found me on a Facebook panel that I did, and she called me and said, I'm a tough case. She has Hashis. She has non-alcoholic fatty liver, say that 3 times fast. She has SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, and she has the MTHFR genetic variation, and you can probably figure out what I might call that genetic variation just by the acronym. I use strong words for it because it's a pain in the butt. And the people that she'd been working with hadn't been able to get her antibodies down significantly, the thyroid antibodies, the TPOAB that we test for. And she wasn't really getting better, but she agreed to give me a try, kind of like a last resort. And she recently texted me and she said that her antibodies were now in the 300s, the lowest they've ever been. And we're going to have a story to tell soon because she has been an interesting case and she's going to be ready to share. So there is more to come with this beautiful woman. And yeah, we've been working together for about 9 months, and we've made some amazing, amazing progress. And she's had to make some very significant choices, but man, she did. And her life is changing. Let's talk about medication. Is it required for autoimmune? And when I mean medication, I mean, the thyroid support that the doctors would be providing. And sometimes medication is required to support the body with autoimmune. If the autoimmune disease has been going on a long time, that part of the body is being attacked and has been being attacked for a long time, and it may need some help to operate properly. And you might be wondering if you can ever get off the medication. And I guess as we went through those stages, stage 4 is about the place where it would normally be prescribed. So by the time you get to stage 4, there's been a lot of damage done. And can you ever get off? There is no easy answer for that. Sometimes yes, sometimes maybe, sometimes no. It depends on the resilience of your body and your body's ability to heal. It will also depend on your effort to support your body. It might. The time that you would give it to allow the body to heal while it's being supported, because it can take a while. Like, this isn't going to be an overnight, oh my gosh, I'm healed kind of a scenario. It does take a while. It also requires you getting to the nitty-gritty of your triggers and eliminating them. And it is based on your body's ability to heal. So all of these are things that depend, and that's why it's a maybe. But you may need to take that medication for the rest of your life. But the reality is, if you did have to, just to live your life to the fullest, isn't that a sacrifice you'd be willing to make? Yeah, something to consider. Can you absolutely improve the way that you live with autoimmune? Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. What do you do next? Well, that's a little bit up to you. Your health is always, always, always up to you. I've just educated you a little more on autoimmune and what it takes to heal. I've also educated you a little on what happens if you do nothing. You will get sicker if you do nothing. You will develop additional autoimmune diseases. It's hard to take yourself through the healing process. Determining your triggers requires testing, and they aren't going to be tests that you find in the medical community. I offer a free vitality breakthrough session to people that are interested in finding out more about what it's going to take to heal. And I'd love to talk with you about those possibilities. Take advantage of the free discussion. Do it. Email me at clientcare@yourhealthmadesimple.com. Sorry, yes.com. Put "I want to talk" in the subject of the email and get that sent off to me right away. I can't wait to chat with you. Thank you so much for taking the time today to be here with me. If you're here and watching, it's also being recorded. So if you get an email with a link to the webinar, you can watch it again, or you can pass it on to someone else that needs this. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope you've learned a little bit more about autoimmune disease. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Hope to hear from you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.